Hello everyone. A little bit between jobs on the RS tub at the minute, waiting on some more resin coming and some more rivets. And as Victor Pelican was well received last week, I thought I'd show you a little bit more about how he came into being. He's a long-term project, is Victor. I've been doing, I'll have to check this, 10 years at least. And he came about because we went to Florida. And the eldest daughter wanted her ears pierced, but said she'd get them done when she was 10. We were on holiday that day, so we went to the mall, and off they went to do ear piercing things. And as is typical the world over, Daddy was bored senseless and went for a walk. And I found an installation, I think they call it now, at one end of the mall with these huge life-size copper pelicans flying in through a window. And I thought that was fantastic. And I've done bits of sculpture. I like making birds, I like making flowers. I mean, if you're making a part for a body panel, whether it be for a hydroplane, whether it be for a car or anything else, it's just metal sculpture at the end of the day. And metal sculpture has been my thing for a long time. So I looked at these copper pelicans and thought, oh, I'm gonna have one of them when I get home. Now, I didn't really fancy the copper version of it, but I did like the idea, because I've always thought pelicans are fantastic birds. You know, you see them on the ground and they're waddly and silly and ungainly, and then they get in the air and they're beautiful flying machines, and then when they hunt they just turn into jet fighters and spear into the water, and I just love to watch them. So I thought, right, when I get home I'm gonna have a pelican. But how do you make a pelican? Where do you start? And where I started was to print off, that's my original pelican reference folder, to print off a bunch of pictures. So I've got, what's that? That's just a pelican. Pelican's tail, full size. More pelican, underside. Feet. And so it went. And I studied these in a lot of detail. So I understood mentally where all the bits of a pelican went. And then I scaled them, so I knew how big it was going to be. And I made it a little bit smaller, because it's huge as it is. I made it a bit smaller than it should be. And the first thing I did, I know I said it was made entirely of aluminium. Well, that's not quite true, because I didn't think the aluminium would be strong enough if I suspended it. So it does have a wire frame inside, and I made a frame to scale from 8mm steel wire, tigged that together, and then set about building the wings. And it's one piece all the way from there, right through here to that end. But it's actually made in 4 sections. There's 2 wingtips, which come chopped off over there, and then there's a middle section which is joined here up the spine, and then the other wingtip is welded through hereabouts. So you've actually got 4 pieces that all have a lot of shape in them, and they're welded together, and the joins have disappeared. So I started that bit with a cardboard template. You can see the wire frame here, and on one side I've clad it with cardboard just to get an idea of the scale of the panel that has to be made, although it was actually made in a few sections, but you can see how it began to take shape at this point. And this is the paper template, the original one. Still kept it just in case I fancy another pelican. Not. And as you can see, it's all been carefully cut to shape and annotated, bits sellotaped on to get the right size, and little notes on it that tell me what I'm supposed to be doing and which goes where, and the coverts are sketched on as well. So having made the template, you can also see the join line. I made 2 wingtips and got them stuck onto the frame. And here are the wingtips. The one bottom left has just been roughed out with a bit of hammer work. The one upper right has been cleaned a little bit further. It's a bit further on. And they were then pinned. You can just see skin pins. There's some little flats on the frame, so it can be pinned into position to get a look at it. And then finally, both wingtips were fixed on. You can see the frame spans through the middle, and that meant it was time to build the middle bits. The middle sections were given their shape on the English wheel, because that was all lovely smooth curves in there, and I wanted it all lovely smooth curves. So that was done on the wheel, and then it got a light sanding just so you get a look at it and make sure there was no wheeling marks or anything like that, make sure the shapes were good. And then the opposite side was wheeled in, and the 2 married up, made sure they worked properly, pinned everywhere, gaps set up, and prepared ready for the welds to go in. The welds were done with the TIG and then flushed off and made it disappear, such I can't see them now. As you can see, there's a lot of shape in the wingtips. You've got the curved section of the aerofoil of the individual feathers. You've got the ends turned up as though they're clawing at the air. Where you've got these supposedly where the feathers overlap, they don't actually overlap. That's just a groove that's been pushed with a bead roller. Somewhere here is a join, which I can't find, which I'm quite happy about. Down here there's a join which runs up the spine. Can't see that either. Clang, there's another join here. And on this wingtip, you can see again, you've got the double curvature and it's turned up at the end. What you don't want is symmetry, because you'll not often find a symmetrical bird, because this wingtip's doing something different to that wingtip. And if you make them too symmetrical, it just looks wrong, it looks dead, it looks sterile. And I'll give you a good example, because over here is a fish. And I learned from this fish that I'd made it much too lifeless. Look at it, it looks dead on a fishmonger slab. There's no life about it. And I learned from that, which is why pelican has more life. Next are the coverts. And these wrap over the leading edge. Well, it's the trail back from the leading edge on a proper bird. And at the end, again, study many photographs, there's actually 3 layers. So you've got that one, and then you have one behind it, and then you have one behind that. And they were built up in 3 layers. Those ones were made and welded on first. They went on later, the second layer, and that went over the top to cover the whole lot. And again, not symmetrical. Same on the other side, roughly. And that also has a lower, and it forms the leading edge. The underside is a little different, because down here, yes, you have a set of coverts. These are much smaller feathers, lots of them. Again, the shape's rolled in with a bead roller. And up here you have a cluster of whatever these are for, I've no idea, but a pelican has them. So they've been added. But what's most interesting or most important about getting this right here is that this here represents the bone structure. This is the pelican's elbow here, and that is shaped to represent the bone structure underneath the skin. The skin is stretched tight over the bones, a bit like a bat wing. And there's a hollow, and that is the bone underneath. And to get the thing right, little details like that, well worth including. The coverts are made as upper and lower caps, then welded along the leading edge, and then the welds are dressed off. They're popped over the front of the wing, a couple of discrete welds, and that's them stuck. Well, that's how the wings were built. And that was just kind of starting out. That was the easy bit. It gets more difficult after that. And you could be forgiven for being concerned at the sheer level of anal Anunnaki detail fanaticism going on here. I mean, if you're going to build a pelican, you don't have to build every feather. But the next bit got even more involved. And that's before I got onto the head and the feet. So I'll show you how the body went together. There's a lot of work in this. I mean, if we start with his neck, which is folded for flight, and then come down to the breast, which is where all the flight muscles are, and then we've got some feathers here. And then on the sides, we have the undercarriage, stored for flight, 2 bulges there for the legs. And that's where he digests all his fish. And the tail is attached down there. So you have shape everywhere. You've got this bulge on here, you've got another bulge at the breast, you've got the neck narrows down. There's a lot of shapes in that, and it all has to flow, it all has to blend, it all has to look like it's made of feathers. And on the top, you've got this area, that's where his neck rises. And then his neck also swoops down and under and back, and his head fits on top of here. So again, a lot of complicated shapes going on in there, and it's a lot of individual pieces all stitched together. The basis of the shoulders, however, came from one piece of material shaped from a cardboard template, and then the edges were shrunk. They've been shrunk by hand rather than with a machine, no idea why. Then there's a lot of hammer and dolly work to get it roughly to shape before it was put on the front of the wing and given some fine tuning. And the final part was to cut the feather shapes into it so that it looks like it's made of bird and not a sheet of aluminium. But that's all one piece at this stage. His neck was another matter. That was made over a little piece of tooling, over a former, and it was made from many, many little pieces of material, all very carefully tacked and then welded together, and then dressed on the outside to get it reasonably smooth, and then it was put over a lovely shiny dolly and planished from the outside to turn all those flats into nice curves. And after that, it was metal finished, sanded, filed, and made to look more like feathers than aluminium, as usual. The section below the neck is made of 2 pieces welded down the centre line. The section below that is a single piece welded across the waist, and the piece beneath that again is 2 sections welded down the centre line and then around the waist. So there's 5 pieces in this section alone. The last piece on the front was made in 3. There was a little former with a back plate and then the outer shell, and the back plate allowed it to be pinned and then later riveted to the steel frame. Once it was made, it was dressed, it was welded to the rest of the front section, and then it was blended in and the welds disappeared, and that was the front largely finished. Apart from his legs, which were first crafted in modelling clay to get the shape, and then a card template was lifted from the modelling clay, and once that was done, the parts were made up from a couple of pieces of aluminium with a weld down the centre to get the right curvature. They were then fettled and welded and glued on, one on each side, and Victor had legs. This is actually the picture that got him called Victor. If you can't see a Victor bomber in there, you're really not trying. The last little finishing touch here was some little pieces of feathers on the undersides of the wings, so they were cut and shrunk and fettled and shaped in, and that just left a whole heap of welding, dressing, finishing, fettling. But as far as the breast, the front was concerned, that was the hard part done. Have you had enough yet? That was even worse. That's how his body went together. And then, having got the hang of building Pelican, it came down to how to build his head, and that is a complicated fabrication. That's his head balanced on. And people always say, what's the tie wrap for? And I always say it's to stop eating that dead fish that lives on top of the door. And the head, well, that's properly complicated. It just got more and more difficult. Or should I say, I made it more and more difficult as time went on. I tried various ways to visualize the head and get it to scale. I tried flat material, I tried cardboard, but in the end I carved a head from a piece of wood to get all the right lines and grooves, and then made cardboard templates from that, which I then transferred to a piece of aluminium, drew around them, cut them out, and then put them back on the wood and shaped them accurately until they fitted onto the piece of timber. There's a lot of them to do. His throat pouch was slightly different because it's skin, it's not feathers, so it was given a nice hammered textured finish. It's a tricky little shape because it also includes where his eye goes, and that also is skin and has the same textured finish. The rest of his head was done in 3 pieces. This is the crown and down at the back of his neck, and then there was 2 cheeks which were cut from a flat sheet and the edges shrunk to get the shape. And once they were fiddled together and fitted with the crown and the beak and all the other bits, it was all welded together, dressed and given the right texture so it looks like feathers again. It was around this time that his neck and shoulders got a bit of a rework as well. This wasn't uncommon. I kept changing stuff as I got a look and decided I could do a better job of it, so that got done again. There remained only the small matter of the big hole in the back of his head. So a piece of material was hammered into about the right shape. That was tried against the back of his head and metal cut away, and the thing gradually made to fit. Then it was welded in the usual way, welds dressed off, cleaned up, and Victor had a complete head. Just need to stick some feathers on the back of it now. The lovely flowing feathers really set Victor off and bring him to life, but they don't flow at all, they're actually razor sharp, and one of the guys stabbed himself and hopped around the workshop cursing that damned bird, which was high praise because it's not actually a bird. So the feathers went onto the back of his head, got them fitting properly, they were fully welded, the welds are all dressed off, and at last Victor had a complete head. I don't know how long this took, forever I think. His head was a long, drawn-out exercise, a lot of very fiddly work, but it worked. It came out extremely well, and the only really trick bit left was his feet, and how to make scaly webbed feet out of aluminium was a proper head scratcher. But it came together in the end. This is my favourite bit. The first thing I tried was just to bend up some feet from flat sheet and then weld the toes onto the outside, but it doesn't work because if the thing's ever suspended you can see it from above and below, and this only works from one side, so that went in the bin and back to the drawing board. The second attempt involved drawing the foot to scale on a piece of 1mm aluminium and then very carefully building up the toes with weld on both sides to give the foot some substance. Once it was built up, the toes could be given some shape and the scales cut in, and that was done with a dental drill and a small diamond burr, and as it was touched on the polishing mop, the polishing soap was driven into the scales and it really picked them out. The final thing was to give them their shape, and of course they cracked at the roots and had to be welded and repaired and welded, but eventually they were manipulated into a nice shape of some webbed feet to be stowed under Victor when in flight. Victor's legs were made by wrapping some aluminium around a piece of steel tube, and it's worth noting that they're not meant to be circular because there's a piece up the back of the leg where all the sinews run. Where it meets his hand was just swaged out with a hammer, and then the hands were constructed with little pieces of material. Notice the as yet unwelded seam. That's where it's going to get shaped to look like it has sinews inside. That is the top of his hand, took little small pieces of material welded together, and that is the inside of his hand. And now if you look at the right hand side, you can see what shape I'm trying to get for those sinews. Here it is again. You can see the shape very clearly now, and that's fully welded. So with that done, the rest of the leg was built up to give the right shape because it kind of tapers down towards the ankle. Then it was smoothed off, the rest of the scales cut and the thing polished, and then finally trial fitted. And would you believe it, Victor has undercarriage. Well, congratulations if you sat through that lot and you're still here. There he is mostly. Couple of things I didn't show you because I didn't have any photographs. He has a tail, which I think I did in one, but I'm not quite sure. And he also has his little feathery leg fairings to keep his knees warm in flight. So they've been done as well. What's left to do? Well, there's some feathers to put on the back, just to finish him off, stuff I was always going to do. There is a bit of a bald patch in the middle of his back. There should be another row of these spiky feathers come down here, so they are still to add. And the big thing is his head. His head isn't finished. It comes off. And it doesn't have a tie wrap on it to stop him eating the fish above the door. It has a tie wrap on it because if I take that off, half his head will come off. Fair bit to do to finish that. There's some unfinished business in the bottom. That was for an earlier version of his neck. This hammered finish is quite hard to reproduce in a small area to make repair patches, and I've got to do something in the bottom of there. Not sure I'm going to do that. And pelicans have a little hooky thing on the end of their beak for grasping fish, and he hasn't got one. And I always planned to weld the end of his beak together and then sculpt a hooky thing which would stick the front of his beak together, and that would be it fixed. Because if I take that tie wrap off, his head will fall apart, wouldn't it, Victor? Yes. It used to pin on, and I wish it would still pin on or rivet anything rather than weld it, because despite the fact I've been welding since I was 10 years old, and I've welded everything to everything, and I've been sought out for welding jobs that experts said couldn't be done, I'm scared of welding that onto there, because it can go so wrong. That's where I'd have to get the weld, in there. And there's so many ways that could go wrong. And then I'd have to get in and dress it all, which I can do. But imagine if that blew a hole in there. Oh, what a job. Still, has to be done, I suppose. Yeah, so I'm a bit scaredy of welding that under there. But we'll see. If this video gets 1,000 million likes and subscribers coming out of every orifice and shares and all that, I'll be committed then. I'll have to grow a pair, man up, whatever, and stick it on. Otherwise, he might go back on the shelf for a little while. We'll see. But either way, thanks for watching. Like I say, if you've made it this far, well done. And we'll be back with some more regular content next week. We've got some stuff to do in the car. John will be over. I'll be, I would imagine, a few others. And we'll get some of that done, and we'll see you on the next one. See you later.